And without further ado, here comes Paul Watson for his final speech.
What's the time for the speech that Watson is giving now?
Like 30 to 40.
Well, I can give you some background then on what the Sea Shepherd Conservation is, and where we came from and where we're at right now. And I started this organization in 1977. And the inspiration for that really was an experience that I had in the Pacific Ocean in June of 1975. I was with Greenpeace, I was a co-founder of Greenpeace, and I was the first officer on that first campaign when we opposed the Soviet whaling fleet, which we found off the coast of California. And for the first time, we were able to put ourselves between the whales and the harpoon. And we were reading a lot of Gandhi at the time. We thought that all we had to do was put our bodies on the line and they would stop. And so Bob Hunter and I found ourselves in this small inflatable boat in front of a 150-foot steel Soviet harpoon vessel bearing down on us, and in front of us were 8 magnificent sperm whales that were bleeding for their life. Every time the harpooner tried to get a shot, I would maneuver the boat, block the path. And this worked for about 25 minutes until the captain on that Soviet boat came down the catwalk and screamed into the ear of the harpooner, and then he turned and smiled and brought his finger across his throat, and that's when we realized Gandhi was not going to work for us that day. A few moments later, the harpoon was fired. It was a horrendous blast. The harpoon flew over our head and slammed into the backside of one of the 8 whales. It was a female. She screamed. It was like a woman screaming. She rolled on her side in a fountain of blood, and suddenly the largest whale in that pond hit the water with his tail and disappeared. He swam right underneath of us and threw himself out of the water in the bow of the Soviet vessel to protect his pod. They were waiting for him with an unattached harpoon. The harpooner pulled the trigger and hit that whale point blank in the head, and he fell back in the water screaming, blood everywhere. And as I watched that whale thrash about in the surface in horrific pain, he caught my eye. And he dove. I saw this trail of bloody bubbles coming at us real fast. And he came up and out of the water at an angle so that the next move was to fall straight down on top of us and crush us. And as his head rose up out of the water and his eye came up right at my eye level, and I'm looking into this eye so close that I could see my own reflection in the eye, I saw something in that eye that changed my life forever. And what I saw was understanding. The whale understood what we were trying to do because I could see the incredible effort he made to pull himself back and then slide back into the sea, and as his eye disappeared beneath the surface. And then he died. I also saw something else in that eye, and it was pity. Not for himself, but for us, that we could take life so thoughtlessly. Why were the Russians killing those whales? It wasn't for food. It was for oil. Spermaceti oil, especially. It's a very high heat-resistant oil. They use it in industrialized machinery. But one of the things that the Soviets used it for was for the construction of intercontinental ballistic missiles. So I said, here we are, hunting down this incredibly intelligent, sentient, socially complex creature for the purpose of making a weapon meant for the mass extermination of human beings. And that's when it hit me. We are insane. And from that moment on, I said, I don't do what I do for people anymore. I do what I do for them, for the whales, for the sharks, for the seals. Those are our clients, and that's what Sea Shepherd does, is represent our clients. And those are those myriad of species that make it possible for us to live on this planet. And so we protect everything from the plankton to the great whales, the sharks, the turtles, and that, and we get involved in campaigns. But, as I said previously, we have to do it in a way that we can be successful and still survive. We can't just go out there and blow them out of the water, but we can intervene. And we intervene not only with imagination, but with humor. For instance, when we go up against the Japanese whaling fleet, I throw stink bombs at them. You know, it's rotten butter, really. It doesn't hurt anybody, it certainly makes life unpleasant. I think one of the funniest things that we ever did was we threw crocodile eggs onto the deck of the Nishan Maru. Not real crocodile eggs, but these crocodile eggs that when they got wet suddenly blew up into styrofoam crocodiles. And that just totally, they didn't know how to deal with that. They just couldn't figure out what was happening there at all. So we try to use this kind of humor to get through to them. And of course, you know, we're always having to deal with the fact that our opposition, despite the fact that they're breaking the law, are constantly harassing and saying that we're pirates and eco-terrorists. And, we got called pirates so many times that I decided we'd design our own flag, our own Jolly Roger. Every pirate had their own Jolly Roger, so we decided to put that out there. They're going to call us pirates. Well, damn it, we'll be pirates. Because, when you really look at history, pirates got things done. The founder of the United States Navy, who also, by the way, is the founder of the Russian Navy, was a pirate, John Paul Jones. Pirates got things done. They're also very democratic societies when you really look at them. Henry Morgan, Blackbeard, what was he doing? He was attacking slave ships. And when he released the slaves, he gave them the option, join our crew or I'll put you on an island and set you free. That was the choice that he made. And 40% of Blackbeard's crew were Africans. And the interesting thing about it? They had equal votes and equal shares on his boat. It's a hell of a lot better than the Royal Navy was, where even any sailor had no rights at all. And if they didn't like their captain, they simply voted him off and appointed a new captain. So piracy was actually a form of democracy in those early years. And why? Because the people who controlled everything were ruthless in their exploitation of not only other people, but also of their environment. So really, all of these things are just a form of perception. If the state says something like, oh, well, these are good guys and these are bad guys, we're all brought up on, well, I don't know about you guys, but I was brought up on movies where the Indians were always the bad guys, And I thought it was really funny when Dances with Wolves came out, and suddenly everybody was cheering for the Indians because, that's how movies manipulate us and everything. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting is that we were all cheering for the Sioux and for, the lead actor, but it was the Kiowa guy who was the bad guy. And it was his land that had been stolen because they had forced the Sioux onto his land. So the guys whose land was stolen still remained the bad guy. And of course, this is how we look at these things. It's always black and white and good and bad and everything. But the world is certainly much more complex than that. But what I do know is this, is that we live on a spaceship Earth. And it's going on an incredible trip around our galaxy. It's only gone around the galaxy 20 times. It's going at 500 miles a second. We've only managed to go around 20 times. In fact, the last time that the Earth was in the position it is right now with relationship to our galaxy was 250 million years ago. Yet somehow or other we think it was all made for us, but anyway, that's another story. But the fact is that we're on this spaceship, and every spaceship has a life support system. And that life support system provides us with the air we breathe, the food we eat, controls our temperatures, regulations. And we're destroying that life support system. And by killing off the crew, all of those species that make it possible for us to be here, which we really don't, for the most part, as a society, don't give much thought to. That it is really the bacteria and the insects and the trees and the plants that run this planet. And if they disappear, then we disappear. Bees make it possible for us to eat the food that we eat. If they disappear, most of that food disappears. But trying to get people to understand that relationship is a very, very difficult task. People say to me all the time, well, what can we teach our children? My answer to that, nothing. Let them be children. Because I found that children have more of a perception as to how the natural world works than adults do. And therefore we should be listening to them, not telling them how to behave, telling them what our morality should be. Sea Shepherd right now is operating, like I said before, in about 40 different countries. And we operate in a very unique way compared to other organizations. For the most part, we're not really an organization. We're a collection of different entities that are in different nations. But we're all united by the fact that we believe in certain things. And that is, we intervene and make sure we do so nonviolently. So we do not cause an injury to anybody. We work within the boundaries of practicality and the law. Those are the things that we do. And all of those entities are free to make whatever decisions within the context of those two basic rules. And it works out quite well. And leadership is organic. And people are arising all the time who come up with ideas. Well, I want to do this campaign. It all started many years back in 1983. I got a call from a guy in Scotland. He said, they're killing seals up here. What the hell are you going to do about it? I said, I don't know. On the west coast of North America, what are you going to do about it? You're there in Scotland. He said, well, what can I do? I'm just an architect here. I said, so anyway, we met with him, and he set up Sea Shepherd Scotland. And he stopped that seal launch, just an individual. And how did he stop it? Well, he was very enthusiastic. Landed on the shore with a bunch of volunteers and confronted the sealers and literally ripped the rifles out of their hands and threw the rifles into the ocean. And then again, he stood on the dock and he stood on the shore with a bowling ball with a wick on it, saying it was a bomb, and throw it into the first boat that stepped ashore. And got arrested for that, but they let him go. And then what we did, we raised so much publicity over all of this that we raised the money to buy that island and turn it into a seal sanctuary, which is what it is to this day. All because one guy called up and said, "What can I do?" And we get this all the time from people, "What can I do?" And our answer is always, "What can you do?" You know, you just have to harness your imagination, your passion, and courageously go out there and make sure that you implement it. That's what you can do. And that doesn't matter, you know, within any ecosystem. I think that the strength of the environmental conservation movement lies not in big groups, you know, like Sierra Club, which I was a director for 3 years and couldn't figure out what the hell they were doing. But in the fact that there are 3.5 million registered non-government organizations dealing with environmental issues. And these are all the organizations you never hear about because they're not doing direct mail and they're not standing on street corners asking for money. They're actually in the rainforests of Amazonia, or they're in India, or they're in Africa, or they're, you know, in Western Australia. They're doing things. They're actually doing things. And they've understood one fundamental thing. You don't need money to do things. You need passion. And if you implement your passion, people will come forward and support you. And we found this over and over and over again. That passion comes first, money comes second. And don't get too much money, because if you get too much money, then you become part of the problem. So now we have these, like Greenpeace, which is I can speak to because I'm a co-founder, brings in $450 million every year. And of that money, 70 to 75% goes into making more money. You know, so this is a problem. They become, organizations get taken over by their lawyers, their accountants, and their fundraisers, and every single founder of the Greenpeace Foundation was forced out the door because they were too busy doing things, and before they do it, they were out the door. And the people who were in control were now in control of that idea. I always sort of smile when I say, when they say, "Well, we did this and we did that," and I'm going, "Well, yeah, I remember doing that, but I don't remember any of you people around there doing it at the time, except that you're posting our pictures in in your newsletters and raising money off of us." So, and that's a problem. You know, we got situations where environmental groups are being used as recruiting organizations by companies. Was the president of the Sierra Club. You know what he's doing now? He's in charge of environmental marketing for Walmart. And then you have the head of Greenpeace UK, who's now working for Burstyn and Marsteller, the largest PR firm in the world, the one that represents Exxon and BP. So, you know, this is the problem, is that these kind of people, they don't care whether they're working for an environmental group or they're working for BP. It's just, you know, it's a money-raising job for them. The real strength of the movement is in the individuals, the people who are in your local community who are trying to save a wetland, or people who are trying to stop a tree being cut down. That's the strength, you know, and something that I constantly am encouraging. Sea Shepherd doesn't do direct mail. We don't go and, you know, we don't spend any money on fundraising. We grow through word of mouth. People visit our ships and get involved. We have 6 ships now, and those ships are run by volunteers primarily. Have to hire a few people like chief engineers, or else it's actually cheaper to hire a chief engineer than to have a volunteer chief engineer. So, but generally, you know, it's run by volunteers, and they do an incredible job. So right now, 2 of our ships are in Melbourne in Australia, and 1 is in Sydney. Those 3 vessels just came back from the Southern Ocean, where they spent 90 days chasing the Japanese whaling fleet around. 2 of our vessels are off the coast of Senegal. 1 of them just came from Guatemala, where they were doing the same thing, stopping poaching activities in Guatemalan waters. And our other vessel is now engaged in what we call the Vortex Project. And the Vortex Project is a project that we're now in partnership with Pharrell Williams, by the way, Pharrell Williams, because he owns a company called Bionic Yarn, which is to make clothing out of recycled plastic. And the Vortex Project is to try and extract some of the 700 million tons of plastic that is floating in our oceans, and to recycle it, try to create some sort of economic incentive to get it out of there. Plastic is worse than oil when it comes to pollution, because it's killing every year hundreds of thousands of birds and fish because they ingest these plastic particles. recently just found a sperm whale that died because it swallowed a Trader Joe's plastic bag. These plastic, they clog up their intestinal systems and their stomachs and everything, and this is a foreign substance that they have absolutely no understanding of what it is. Last year I was on the beaches in Samoa and Tonga and on the Great Barrier Reef. Every island that we encountered, we were collecting tons of plastic off of the beaches, just the beaches, that's not counting what's in the water, every single one of them. The other thing we found was that on the Great Barrier Reef, the largest reef system in the world, about 80% of it's dead. But you wouldn't know that to see the Australian tourist brochures. Certain areas where it's still healthy is where they lead the tourists. But I wasn't in an area which where it was for tourists. I was in areas where it wasn't, and it didn't look very healthy at all. Not only is it pollution, acidification, but also introduction of unwanted species like the crown of thorn starfish, which literally eats coral, and it's been hard to control that. So we're really created a world which is in disharmony with the ecological laws, and for that reason, these things are breaking down fast. You still have people, of course, denying climate change. I think Rush Limbaugh said, "Hey, it snowed." I guess that's a bunch of bullshit, isn't it? These guys have about as much understanding of science as, well, Rush Limbaugh. But this is the problem we also have, is we have media pollution, and that is that the media tells us what to think and how to behave. There's four laws of media. Just as there's 3 laws of ecology, there's 4 laws of media. And I learned this many, many years ago. If you want to get a story, you have to incorporate one or hopefully all of those laws of media. And because that is that the media only understands 4 elements: sex, scandal, violence, and celebrity. If you don't have one of those elements, you don't have a story. You've got nothing. If you have 4 of those elements, you've got a story. You can't get rid of it. It just goes on and on and on and on. And that's exactly what we've had to tap into. For example, back in 1985, I led a campaign to stop the killing of wolves, the aerial shooting of wolves in British Columbia and the Yukon. And we had the perfect story, and it carried the headlines for weeks, and we shut it down. And what the story was they were going to shoot wolves from helicopters, therefore that's a violent activity, so we have the violence. They're threatening to shoot us if we intervene, more violence. We have a British Columbia Minister of Environment who took a bribe from a hunting organization to kill the wolves. Scandal, violence and scandal. I simply rounded that up by recruiting Bo Derek as our spokesperson on that campaign. And at the press conference, one of the journalists from the Vancouver Sun, he said, "What the hell does Bo Derek know about wolves? This is ridiculous having her as your spokesperson." And my answer to him was, if I had Dr. Gordon Haber or David Meck, the 2 foremost whale biologists in the world here, it'd be an empty room, nobody would pay any attention. I see that this place is packed with media. It's going to be the front page story of your paper tomorrow. You're going to write it. It's going to be placed there. There's not a damn thing you can do about it, is there? Because they make the rules. We simply play the game. And I always joke because in our membership we have William Shatner and Richard Dean Anderson and Christian Bale and Pierce Brosnan and Sean Connery. How could we possibly lose? We have 2 James Bonds. We have MacGyver, Captain Kirk, and Batman. And that is the perception that goes out in the media. When we need, to get a message out, I don't call some expert in biology or oceanography. I call an actor or a musician, because they have the ability to get these stories out. We've had directors like Anthony Kiedis of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Richard Dean Anderson's been a director. He was out on a campaign one time with us, and we had a leak in the boat and was causing a problem, and the reporter said, "Well, why didn't you fix it?" He said, "Well, I could, but I don't have my writers." And the thing is that the perception of what people who are, the most credible people in our society are really people who make a living pretending to be somebody they're not. But we have to exercise or use that mythology in order to get our stories across. Those are the laws of media. And the media is a powerful instrument. I've always said that the most powerful weapon that's ever been invented is the camera. There's nothing that can compare with it. And a few years ago, I went to all of the networks and I said, the biggest show on Discovery right now is a bunch of guys going into a very remote and cold area of the Bering Sea to catch crabs. I'll give you men and women from all over the world going to an even more remote, more hostile area of the ocean to save whales. It has to be more compelling than a bunch of guys catching crabs. And same story every week. You know, I mean, how many craps can you get before everybody gets bored? But anyway, I underestimated the intelligence of the TV audience. But Animal Planet made a gamble on it, and they took on the show, and it became their #1 show. And that the great thing for us is that show brought the issue into people's homes all around the world. There are sort of drawbacks. When I was in Namibia doing undercover work, people kept asking me for autographs, which wasn't very helpful. But you know, it does illustrate just how extensive that those programming gets, because television is in our society reality. And Whale Wars is actually probably one of the few really authentic reality shows, because Animal Planet has absolutely no say in what we do or how we do it. They show up with the cameras and they film. And we have no say on what they film or how they film it either. So it's a perfect union where two independent entities get to work with each other. And sometimes what they film is embarrassing. And of course, the other thing we have to deal with television is they're constantly trying to organize drama amongst my crew. So I always have to get my crew and say, look, just ignore all this crap, because the cameraman will say, this person doesn't like you, and this person said this. Because, they're trying to make a pseudo-reality show out of a real reality show, because they want people to actually be fighting. And so that's one of the reasons, actually, that we haven't been as popular as Deadliest Catch, because those guys they're out of control on those boats. I mean, but we have a little bit of control over. Well, we have actually a lot of control over our crew, and mainly the fact that I don't want them, and they agree that they shouldn't be making fools of themselves and doing a lot of infighting when we have a job to do. But anyway, another example of this is that many years ago I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the Captain Planet series that was on Turner Broadcasting, and many years ago I was an advisor to Captain Planet, and was a little bit of a thing, and occasionally give the advice if they wanted it, but they usually didn't. But anyway, they showed a segment of Captain Planet at the Environmental Film Festival in Santa Monica, California, and they had 500 children there to see this. And they picked a segment where Captain Planet was out on the water, and he was ripping nets apart, he's freeing dolphins, he's freeing whales, he's freeing fish, and he's sinking boats. And at the end, the producer, she said, is there any questions? I said, well, yeah, Barbara, I've got a question. You got Captain Planet taking the law into his own hands here. I mean, he's going out on the water, he's destroying equipment in order to save lives. I don't have any problem with that, but you're telling all these children here it's perfectly okay to take the law into your own hands and destroy equipment in order to save lives. I don't have any problem with that either, but why? When, as children, we grow up and we do what Captain Planet does, your network calls us terrorists. Why are you telling these children that a solution is to be found in something you would never support in reality? No wonder children become confused. We're told we should do this, and then we do completely the opposite. Many years ago, I gave a talk, we gave a series of talks in the Queen Charlotte Islands on the Haida Reservation. And it was 4 talks, a kindergarten class, then we did grade 7 and 8s, and then it was 3 talks, and then the senior class. And what I discovered was really enlightening, that the higher the education, the stupider people got. Because the kindergarten kid was great. We got in there, anybody here speak Haida? Oh, they all spoke Haida. Anybody here know anything about whales? We just sat back and listened. We get into mid-school, anybody here speak Haida? A few. Anybody know anything about whales? Oh, a few. Get into senior grade 12, anybody here speak Haida? None. Anybody know anything about whales? Who cares? So we took all these beautiful children and turned them into imbeciles. That's our education system. And I found that really quite enlightening at the time, is that, what do we want in an education system? We want people to grow up and become part of the system. And the last thing we want them to do is think. And so therefore we're constantly trying to stop that. What I do with Sea Shepherd, in a way, is to get people to think. We do things which are controversial, and people begin to talk about it. And we go up against oppositions, but we do so in a way that we can manipulate the situation so we don't get, we don't go to prison or we get killed ourselves. And we have an unblemished record in that respect. We've never had anybody injured. We've never injured anybody, and we've never had anybody convicted of any serious crime. Oh yeah, we had a few convictions for breaking the Seal Protection Act in Canada, but you can't protect seals without breaking the Seal Protection Act, so we had to do that, but we actually broke it in order to challenge it. but it was a very difficult thing to do. But, you know, breaking the Seal Protection Act is hardly really a crime. So those are the only things that we've had to deal with. Right now, actually, I was put on the Interpol red list for trespassing. Nobody gets put on the Interpol red list, which means they want your extradition for trespassing. But Japan's a powerful country, so Japan got me on the Interpol list for trespassing. Why am I not in Japan? Because the United States itself thinks that that's a pretty stupid thing to do, and so therefore I'm not being extradited. You know, I think that the State Department said, what? You know, that's a list for serial killers and war criminals, trespassing. In fact, I didn't even trespass. I'm accused of conspiracy to trespass, because somebody else trespassed and said that I told them to do so, even though I didn't, and I'm on camera saying not to. But that was enough. That's all they needed to do. So, you know, we have to deal with these things all of the time. And so, you know, when you're bucking the system, you have to expect that to happen. When we were in Canada, of course, you know, we were opposing the seal hunt, and we've had to do things like, for instance, one of the things that we did was we had to retire one of our ships that was getting old. And, you know, retiring a ship is really very expensive. So I found a way to retire ships, and I've done it twice, for nothing. I had the Canadian government seize them. So in 2008, we brought the Farley Mowat, our vessel, and by the way, my friend Farley just died 2 days ago. He was 92, and he was writing right up to the day he died, one of the great Canadian conservationists. But we named a boat after him, the Farley Mowat. 2008, we were retiring that boat, so we brought it into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And I said to the Canadian Fisheries Minister, you don't dare take our boat. It was perfectly Brer Rabbit strategy. And of course he did, and he attacked the boat, and he took it prisoner, and he charged the crew. We bailed out the captain and the first officer with $5,002 coins, which in Canada we call doubloons or doubloons, and made a big deal about it. But the great thing is all that controversy led to the European Union banning seal products in Europe. So and that's why I put an all-European crew on that ship, so that all the people arrested were Europeans. And so it created a great controversy in Europe. And then they came back and they said I had to pay $75,000 to get my ship back. And I said, that's okay, you can keep it. And they said, no, you don't understand. We'll keep the ship. I said, yeah, I understand that. Just keep the ship. Well, they ended up holding that ship for over 2 years, running up bills for its security because they thought we were going to steal it. And it cost them over $1.5 million in fees and berthage fees and everything, and then they had to sell it at auction for $5,000. You know, so, and we'd done this to them in '92 with another vessel, the Sea Shepherd, when we retired at Vancouver Island. And they came in and they gave me a pilotage bill for $7,500. And they said, you got to pay this or you're leaving. And I said, well, I didn't need that's compulsory. They said it's compulsory. And I said, that's just too expensive. I'm not going to pay it. No, you don't understand. If you don't pay this, you're not going to leave. I said, well, that's fine. I understand it. I'm not going to leave. That vessel there was for 15 years before they managed to remove it at the cost of over $1 million. So I look at the Canadian government as my source of retiring vessels. So we always try to make these strategies work in our favor in that way. And we've attracted a lot of people to us who you would think would be very unusual. The head of our investigation department right now is Scott West, who retired recently as the head of enforcement for the Environmental Protection Agency on the West Coast. So he's heading up our investigations now. One of our directors, two of our directors in Australia are former Australian senators, Senator Bob Brown, who is head of the Green Party, and Senator Ian Campbell, who was the Environment Minister under the previous Liberal government before this one. So it crosses all sort of political boundaries in that way. And we encourage that, too, to get people involved, because one thing we all have in common, doesn't matter what politics are or anything, is the fact that we live on this planet and we have to protect the planet. And the best way to protect that planet is to protect diversity in our oceans, because that's the real danger. That if diversity in the oceans falls, then the entire planet will collapse, or life on our planet as we know it will collapse. That is, if the ocean dies, we die. It is simply the single most important issue to humanity. More important than finding a cure for cancer, more important than anything, because if the oceans die, we die. It doesn't matter if you live in Denver or in New York, If the oceans die, we die. And that's the message that we're trying to get across. And what we're doing is by creating a movement, we're able to take on hundreds of different campaigns, which would be outside of the scope of an individual leader to organize. But these campaigns are mushrooming around the world with people understanding that yes, we can make a difference. And we can make a difference through the strategic application of direct action. Not just direct action for direct action's sake, but the strategic application of it. And that is to know what our weapons are, cameras, to know what our boundaries are. And this way I think that we can survive and continue to make a difference. When people say, you know, you guys aren't achieving anything, I just point to the fact there's 6,000 whales in the Southern Ocean that are swimming freely now that wouldn't have been there if we didn't do anything. There are hundreds of thousands of seals, millions of fish that because we intervene are still in our oceans. And that to me is the only thing that I'm really concerned about. I'm not concerned about winning any popularity contests. I'm not concerned about what people think about what our activities are. What I'm concerned about is saving diversity, saving lives. And I'm quite proud of what our crew has accomplished over the years and the lives that they have saved and the awareness that they've created. And we're going to be making a motion picture about us this year, which is going to have a terrific impact because that's the biggest mind bomb of them all is a motion picture. So, previously when things are considered to be unacceptable, you just simply make a motion picture of it and all of a sudden unacceptable becomes acceptable because that is the driving force behind our culture. So we'll probably be, unfortunately, a mainstream organization after our movie comes out. I'm sure they'll take liberties and, it'll be some sort of romantic affair out on the high seas. But, again, we have to adapt to these different medias in order to make a difference. Anyway, thank you. It's been a pleasure to speak here, and this debate was fun. Our opposition was nothing if not passionate and loud. But I appreciate the opportunity to have come. Thank you.
So we do have a lot of questions that are coming up. If people have, if when coming in you were given your question that you had pre-submitted, those people should come up first. If you have an earlier number, come on up. And if we have time, people who have not pre-submitted questions are welcome to ask as well. So whoever has number one, come on up.
My name is John. Thank you for taking the time to come and interact with us about the financials of going vegan or changing your diet. I think if you were to spend the money on McDonald's value menu, you could take the time to go and get some lettuce and vegetables. I don't really think that it's that big of a difference, personally. I think he's in the audience. My question for you is the Japanese just announced that they will be going back to the Southern Ocean again this December for non-lethal research. Will Sea Shepherd be there to monitor or intervene?
Yes, we will. The International Court of Justice in The Hague ruled that Japan's so-called scientific research was illegal and ordered them to stop. The Japanese Prime Minister 2 days later said, yes, we believe in the rule of law, we will stop. A week later, they announced they're going. Not this year, but next year they're going to resume lethal killing whales. This year they're going to send 4 vessels to do research, non-lethal research. But the 4 vessels that they're sending are harpoon vessels, which seems rather strange. So our ships will be down there to make sure that that non-lethal research is non-lethal research. So vessels are being prepared for that. We have a lot of work to do. The Bob Barker was significantly damaged when one of the harpoon boats rammed it this year. But we'll have that all fixed in there, and we're already recruiting the crew to return. And so the campaign's on schedule to return. Next year we will also be there. We have an incredible support base in Australia. According to the Melbourne Age, we have 83% support of the Australian people. So even though we have a hostile government, and Tony Abbott is a complete imbecile, the fact is even he can't go against us because the people of Australia really support what we're doing.
I have one more thing. Just with that being said, you were talking about the disposal of your ships at the time of retirement. I've seen documentaries where they put them onto the reef to help expand. That would be something that you would look forward to doing in the future.
Yeah, except that's a very expensive thing to do also. But what was really funny on the first ship, though, I have to I'll tell you this, is that a guy from the Underwater Divers Association of British Columbia called me and left a message saying, you know, could we get your vessel to sink as for divers? And I called back, but I got the wrong number, and I left a message with somebody. And I said, yeah, sure, you can sink the ship. You know, all I'd really like is like a videotape of it if it's happening. So next thing I know, what happened is that went to somebody who carried it to the Mounties, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Next thing I know, the Mounties are in a full force investigation. They don't bother to call me. No, they go and tell the media and say, you know this, you know that. And finally they walked into Jay Straight's office, who was the undercover Underwater Diving Association. He says, you know Paul Watson? He says, yeah. What's this about you sinking a vessel for? Oh yeah. And then he explained what the whole thing was, and it was a little embarrassing because they spent $20,000 on that investigation.
Hi, my name is Dan. I just wanted to say thank you very much for taking the time coming. You're my hero, and it's an honor to meet you.
Well, thank you.
With the current injunction against Sea Shepherd USA, I know that there's limitations with the crew. Can Americans still crew with that campaign, and does that limit your ability in the field as far as prop trawlers, retake gas, and things like that?
Now, the injunction is against what happened in February of 2012. The Japanese whaling industry applied to get an injunction against Sea Shepherd interfering with their activities in the Southern Ocean, which we thought was somewhat bizarre. But anyway, the lower court judge, Richard Jones, who happened to be Quincy Jones' brother, by the way. Anyway, Richard Jones looked at this and dismissed the whole thing and said, how can you come into my courtroom after you've been in contempt of the Australian federal court? You come into my courtroom with unclean hands, you're not getting the injunction. So we felt that it was, you know, we could carry on, no problem. And then that was in February. On December 17th, Judge Alex Kaczynski of the Ninth Circuit Court issued them an injunction without any explanation. And our ships had already left, which meant that we were charged with 21 counts of contempt because we didn't know, you know, what we were doing. But actually, we did comply with that injunction as much as we could. So that ended up with us going to court in November. We had 5 days in court, and a 90-page judgment came out from Judge Shaw exonerating us, saying we were not guilty. Where is that now? Judge Kaczynski has to sign off on it. He still hasn't done so. Meanwhile, the Japanese have gone in, and this is how we knew they were going back whaling. They went into the court in Seattle and asked for another injunction. Well, why would they ask an injunction when the government has just said they're not going whaling? So that was the first indication that they were going to return to whaling. But you know, it really doesn't matter, because that just affects Sea Shepherd USA. The campaign is now run by Sea Shepherd Australia. The ICR actually asked the Seattle judge to bring Australia into the injunction, and the judge's response to that was, you know, I kind of like Australians, but I just don't think I have any jurisdiction over them. So that's not going to happen. Another interesting thing is our ships all fly the Dutch flag. The reason for this is that Japan put pressure on every country that we ever had a flag under and removed our flag. They removed our British flag, our Canadian flags, Cayman Island flags. We had the Belize flag for 19 days before they removed it. They just simply went to their foreign ministries and said, take their flag away. That's the kind of power they had. And they did so with the Dutch foreign ministry. We went under the Dutch flag. And then the Dutch foreign minister came to the registry and said, take their flag away from them. And that's when the Dutch minister the Dutch foreign minister discovered something that even he didn't know about the Dutch government. And that is, the Dutch government has no power to take a flag off a Dutch vessel. That goes way back to the days of the Dutch East India Company, when the company was more powerful than the government. And so the Dutch foreign minister was so upset about that, he said, well, I'm going to pass legislation to try and change that, which would take about 3 years, and then they voted him out of office, so we're still there with the Dutch flags. The safest and most secure country to register your vessel in is the Netherlands.
Hi, my name is Ian Kim, and thank you so much for coming to this event and delivering a great message. And I was participating in this online debate organized by Binghamton University, resolved the United Nations should adopt a resolution decrying or demanding an annual dolphin hunt in Taiji, Japan. So while debating, I had this question: does exercising extreme method to stop dolphin hunts or whale hunts can actually have positive effect on decrying these kind of hunts. And will it be more beneficial or effective for intergovernmental organizations to intervene on decrying this kind of dolphin hunt or whale hunt?
It probably would, but here's the problem, is getting people aware of the issue. We've produced an Academy Award-winning film, The Cove, to bring people's attention to this. The Cove Guardians, Sea Shepherd Cove Guardians, spend every day from September 1st to the beginning of March in Taiji to do a daily live streaming what's going on to increase people's awareness. We're not breaking any laws. There's nothing extremist about what we're doing. But this year we finally broke through when Carolyn Kennedy issued an official protest against it as the ambassador. And as the ambassador of the United States to Japan, she made that protest. And the State Department backed her up on that. That was followed by a condemnation of the Taiji dolphin slaughtered by the British ambassador, the German ambassador, the Italian ambassador, and the Romanian ambassador. So we finally have gotten official condemnation from various nations on this thing, and that's been a big breakthrough. The Japanese government has been extremely stubborn on both whaling and the killing of dolphins. One of the arguments they use is, well, it's a cultural right. In fact, the killing of dolphins in Taiji began in 1969. And the killing of whales was initiated by General Douglas MacArthur in 1946. So killing whales is part of Japanese culture, then American occupation should be also, and I don't think they want that. But one of the interesting things is the Aboriginal people, the indigenous people of Japan, the Ainu, asked for permission to do traditional whaling, and the Japanese government denied it to them. So they denied it to their own Aboriginal people, but they want to say that their people, the non-Aboriginal people, should have a cultural right to something that they denied a cultural right to the Ainu too. So it's all very, very hypocritical. One of the problems with Japan is that they're very much invested in what I call the politics and economics of extinction. There's money to be made by driving a species to extinction. It's hard to believe, but for instance, if you look at the bluefin tuna, that fish alone, one fish is worth $75,000 on average, and some are sold over to $1 million. Now, as you diminish their numbers in the ocean, their value in the warehouses goes up. So if you wipe them out, and the only bluefin bluefin tuna in existence are the 10 to 15 year supply that Mitsubishi has in their warehouses, they can sell that fish for anything they want. So billions of dollars can be made from exterminating a species. The same thing they're doing with elephants, grabbing as much ivory as they can and stockpiling it in bulks so that the lower the number of elephants, the higher the value of the commodity. Wipe it out, invaluable commodity. This is how ruthless these investors are when they're doing this. They are intentionally, knowingly driving species to extinction for profit. Well, I've had many people that have been mentors, I think, over the years. Farley Mowat, who I mentioned and died a couple of days ago, was one of them. He wrote 49 books, most of them about natural issues and things, and he was very outspoken. There was nothing that could keep Farley from speaking his mind on anything. And he's a literary icon in Canada, but at the same time, he showed me the value of just speaking out. Other influences in my life, I was a medic for the American Indian Movement during the occupation of Wounded Knee in 1973, and what I learned there is that you do what you do not because you're going to win or lose. You don't focus on that. You focus on doing the right thing, and you can't be distracted by the possibility that you're overwhelmed in numbers and you're going to lose. You just do what you do because it's the right thing to do. The other influence on me, rather strange, is a Confederate captain. Not many people are aware that 3 species of whales are probably alive today because of the Civil War. The Confederacy wasn't able to fight the U.S. Navy, but what they did do was put to sea a whole flotilla of commerce raiders. And their targets, one of their targets, the Yankee whaling fleet. And they pretty much wiped it out. And why Captain James Waddell is an inspiration to me is because he did it without killing a single person. And I thought that was brilliant. He sank 37 whaling ships without killing a single person. Unfortunately for Waddell, he sank most of them after the war was over, but he didn't know the war was over because he was up in the Bering Sea. But he had to flee and then surrender. You know, they chased him around the world. He surrendered his vessel to the English when he was out the Mersey River. So it was the last Confederate flag that was flown during the war. Now the motivations of the Confederacy are to be suspect, but at the same time, and this is a very controversial thing, slavery would have been ended in the Confederacy within 10 to 15 years for the simple reason it made no economic sense, because the North had found a better form of slavery. A slavery so insidious that nobody even knew it existed, and it was called freedom. You work in our factories, in our mines, for $1 a day. You're responsible for feeding yourself, clothing yourself, and if you get hurt, that's your problem. It's an insidious form of slavery, and yet it was adopted without any hesitation because it had that word freedom in it. So the economics of all of this is really what's a concern, and economically, slavery was no longer making any sense. And so the wars there's so many complicated reasons for it. But one of the things that I most deplore is the fact that we replace one form of slavery with an even more insidious form of slavery. And that affects all Americans today.
I'm kind of obsessed with the issue of the plastics in the ocean, and is it the question of marshaling the incredible resources of multiple navies and military, starting with America, of course, to put incredible resources to the seas and find technologies to somehow sieve massive areas, especially where it's concentrated with the currents and so forth, these islands. If we could somehow, turn it around on these guys to make this their mission instead of sonar blasting them, with high volumes and so forth, to make it a military priority to get the plastics out of the ocean.
That's a good idea. Captain Jacques Cousteau said back in the early 90s, he said that if the navies of the world had any sense of moral responsibility, they would be out protecting the oceans instead of playing their silly little war games with each other. And he was a captain in the French Navy. 2 months ago, I had actually addressed the French Navy and the French Senate, asking them to get involved with stopping poaching off the coast of Africa and also addressing this plastic issue. And I think the French Navy is paying attention to this. I've published 2 articles in the French Naval magazine on this. So I'm hoping we'll be able to make some progress there. They certainly do have the ships, so they have the ability to do something positive. Unfortunately, with the American Navy, we tend to use that to kill whales and dolphins with their sonar thing, trying to find submarines for enemies that don't exist. But, because Al-Qaeda doesn't have submarines, nor anybody else of relevance. But, this is the way our system works here, is you invest into these military technologies, and so many people are employed in it, you carry on manufacturing and testing them, even though they have no possible use. But what we can do, though, what we're trying to do is find an economic incentive for removing plastic, and that's why we're now in partnership with Pharrell Williams and his company, and also with G-Star Jeans, and talking to other companies about getting involved. Like water bottle companies and things like that. We're also trying to get them to switch from using plastic bottles. We're making progress. San Francisco has banned plastic bottles and bags, and Tasmania has banned plastic bags. So it's a joint educational and also recovery program.
So I was glad to hear that you're recommending superheroes in terms of accomplishing things through the media, because we do have at least one of the Avengers on board with our solar program, so I'll keep following with that. More seriously though, I was struck by what you said about young people and not teaching them, but learning from them. I have 2 small girls myself, and I worry every day about what's going to come out the other end of the educational process. The other thing though is I feel like many, if not most, young people, college-age people in particular, don't have a sense of the power that they hold, even within the institutions where they are being taught. So I guess my question to you is, aside from being an inspiration, how do you give young people a sense of their own power?
I can only speak really to my own daughter. And when she was 7 years old, I said to her, look, Lanny, I'm not your boss, you know. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm simply here to support you in whatever you want to do. And you can do anything that you put your mind to. And she did. You know, when she was a teenager, she was studying to be an actress, and then her mother said, oh, that's okay, but now she wants to be a musician, and, you know, she's got to make up her mind, and she was studying karate, and she was doing all this other stuff, and her mother kept saying, you know, she's got to make up her mind, and I was saying, no, she doesn't. You know, she's just experimenting and looking at things. And now she's, I call her the goddess of Halo. She's the producer of the Halo war game. But she used all of those things, drama, music, karate, and everything in the production of that game. She and I have some differences over the game, but you know, that's got nothing to do with the fact that she achieved what she wanted to do. I didn't want her to do what I was doing. I wanted her to do what she was doing. And I think that's probably the best thing to do with children, is encourage them to be who they are, because they can't be who we want them to be. You know, they have to be who they are, what's within them. Of course, the other conversation I had with her was when she was 17. I said, don't trust any guy under 30, you know, I'll pull up. She took that advice too.
Hi, my name is Jamie, and my son Jack is joining the Bob Barker.
Oh, wonderful.
Jack. You talked a little bit about economics, and I found it intriguing when you brought up the idea that you bought an island, ended up buying an island to preserve the seals. And I've often thought about that. I thought, why doesn't the conservation movement in various forms embrace the proprietarian framework that we live in more? I think about a story, I remember years ago, Don Henley of the Eagles, if I remember it right, was trying to get government to intercede and preserve Thoreau's Walden Pond, if I remember right, that area.
Right.
And I kept thinking, what in the world, why doesn't he get together with a few of his rock star buddies and buy the place, you know? So if you want to comment on that idea.
Well, you know, there are groups like the Nature Conservancy, which does buy land in order to protect it. One of our crew members, Doug Tompkins, he was the founder of Esprit, and his wife was the co-founder of Patagonia. What they've done is bought hundreds of thousands of square miles of Argentina and Chile, which they're turning into private parks. The interesting thing there is that when they bought this land and they proceeded to then make it a nature reserve, they came under heavy pressure from both the Chilean and the Argentinian governments, because they said, well, where are the employees? What? Well, logging and mining. You're not doing any logging and mining? No. Why? Well, when we sold you this land, we expected that you were going to use it. And so they got really angry, on the whole thing. So it's been a real thing. They held on to it. He created the Puma National Park. And then what he did was he gave it to Chile. They're making these national parks, but they're giving them to the countries. They're giving it back, but under an ironclad agreement that this is what it's for. So individuals are making. It's a good friend of mine. She bought 16,000 acres of Molokai. And adjoining her is another 18,000 acres owned by the Nature Conservancy. That's half the island. That's the reason Molokai is not a tourist trap like the rest of the islands, and the Hawaiian people are still free to, you know, I think there's one stop sign on the entire island, you know, so it's, again, that's individuals making a difference.
That can work. Incidentally, thank you for being here, and I hope my son stays warm down there this winter. I hope you get here.
The ships are warm, and that the Bob Barker, although was our toughest ship, it's a more Spartan vessel. It was formerly, by the way, a Norwegian whaling vessel in the 50s, and it was been converted. So we tend to turn these bad ships into good ships. And why it's called the Bob Barker is that Bob gave us $5.2 million, and he actually didn't want the ship named after him. I actually talked him into it, but he really wasn't interested. And I said, yeah, well, you know, it'd inspire a lot of people if you name it. And so he did. So that's why the ship's named the Bob Barker. The other vessel is the Sam Simon, which is named after the creator, one of the co-creators of The Simpsons. And then the other vessel is the Steve Irwin. Our vessels in Senegal is the Bridget Bardot, which originally we named Godzilla, or Gojira, and I just couldn't resist the Japanese whalers saying, oh, we're being attacked by Gojira. And it was also like in the headlines of the Japanese paper, Gojira attacks whaling fleet. So I could just too much of it. But the company apparently was owned, Toyo Company, that owns the rights to Godzilla, protested, so we had to change the beast into the beauty, and we named it the Bridget Bardot. It's been a long time supporter. And then our other vessel is named the Jairo Mora Sandoval, and that's named after Jairo, who was murdered in May of last year in Costa Rica for protecting turtles. And so we wanted to make sure that his name was not forgotten for the sacrifice that he made.
Can you kind of describe the crewing application process for some of the acreage and actually crew?
I don't know if I can describe it. I'm not in charge of crew. Peter Hammerstead is. But what we do is that they have the crew applications are on the website, and then people send in their crew applications, and then they're interviewed. And it used to be fairly easy to get on the crew because, you know, we were desperate for crew. Now we've got like 2,000 or 3,000 crew applications, so we try to go through them. But we're not looking for professional people. We're looking for passionate people. And it's just like Ernest Shackleton said in 1911 when the London Times criticized him that his crew were not professionals. He said, I don't want professionals. I want people who are going to get me where I'm going. I want people with passion. And that makes all the difference. The only troubles I've ever had with crew are professionals, because they're the biggest whiners and complainers. You know, volunteers who go on there get, you know, they just like to be there. They embrace the possibility, and they enjoy it and they contribute to it. So I've always encouraged that. Yes, we do have professionals, but we try to get passionate professionals for our engineers and our navigators and our, you know, and that. But generally, all the other places can be trained. And you know, people say, well, you know, you guys are a bunch of amateurs. You know, we see on whale wars, you're doing this, you're doing that. But you know what? In 10 years, we've never had a single crew member lost or injured. Japanese have had 3 fatalities and numerous injuries on their whaling ships. So it's not, professionalism doesn't mean that perfection.
Hi, I apologize if this was already discussed. I stepped out for a second. But in your speech, you had mentioned that you use more aggressive tactics when you're trying to stop whaling, conducted in the name of research and science. Many of these tactics seem to be dangerous and place human lives at risk. But do you feel that, and to add to this, it seems that your opponents seem to escalate their own risk factor in their response. Do you feel, though, that animal conservation is worth these ever-increasing risks? How do you weigh the value of one animal over the animals suited here?
Well, I think the fact that we haven't had anybody injured really illustrates the precautions that we take to make sure nobody's injured. Unfortunately, you know, whalers tend to be much more aggressive, and they can get away with it. They could kill us if they're Japanese, and the Japanese government will support them. So we also have to be very cautious of, you know, how we respond to their activities. But the one thing I do ask every crew member: are you willing to risk your life to protect a whale? And if they say no, then we're not interested. And that's the one fundamental question. The reason why people say, "Oh, well, that's pretty extreme." I mean, asking a lot of people to risk their life to protect a whale. And I said, well, you know, we don't seem to have any problem in our society asking young people to risk their lives for oil wells and real estate. You know, pin medals on you for that. So I think protecting an endangered species is just as noble as any other pursuit. The fact that you're working to protect a species that would no longer be here, that is something worth risking your life for. But at the same time, we don't do it foolishly. You know, we make sure that those precautions are taken, and we train everybody to this. We know we're in one of the most hostile areas of the world's oceans. You fall in that water, and you're going to be dead within a few minutes. So we make sure that everybody's well instructed in that way.
Thank you.
With the diatribes of people who are pushing back against all of our environment problems that we clearly have. You have corporate, you have lobbyists, people who are pushing money into all of this, which makes it, the corporate interests appear to be stronger. One, how do you fight back against that? And two, what can we specifically do as a community to help?
Yes, it does appear sometimes that they are strong, but at the same time, I do believe that persistence and patience and courage will triumph over all of that. We've seen that in so many cases. You know, Gandhi's campaign against in India against the British to get them out of there. That was considered, well, again, another impossible task that was accomplished. And one of the things that we have in our favor is that the environmental conservation movement, the animal rights movement, these are the strongest and fastest growing movements in history because they involve everybody. The environment movement involves every single human being on the planet. So I don't know of a movement that's grown this fast, and also it's an example of the most nonviolent movement that has ever been created. And I hope we maintain that, because I'm concerned that when we get to a situation where people's children might be dying or something, that we're going to see a violent reaction to that. And so what we're trying to do, what I'd like to do, is see that results can be secured without anybody being hurt. So it doesn't lead to that situation where people out of desperation resort to a violent response.
My name is Joseph Cruz, by the way, and we're really happy to meet you here. Thank you. We first saw you on Philmont. Nice. Thank you.
I was wondering if the recent ICJ ruling stating that the Japanese whaling program was not actually scientific. Did you see a change in the way people perceive sea shepherds, and like they saw that it basically showed that the Japanese were wrong, and I wondered if there was like a change or a shift in kind of people supporting you more?
People supported us, who continue to support us. People who didn't support us, some of them do support us now. And other people, you couldn't change their mind on anything, no matter if you hit them in the head with a 2x4, because they're just stupid. And these are people who listen to the Russian Limbaugh show and things like that. And so sometimes I just cannot believe the level of ignorance in this country. I think what was it Sarah Palin said last week, that if she was president, she would use waterboarding as a form of baptism. You'd think the Christians would be pissed at that. Why would you dishonor baptism with such a statement? This woman has no idea what she's talking about. I used to think that Ronald Reagan was the dumbest president ever, and then all of a sudden, George Bush came around and I go, can it get any worse? Oh yes, it got worse. Fortunately, she didn't make it. But what was the funniest thing that Tony Blair said about George Bush? I don't want to get political, but I just thought this is hilariously funny. Tony Blair said, in talking to Tony Blair, George Bush said, that French, they don't even have a word for entrepreneur. How does somebody like that get into a position of power? I mean, that's really strange. But, any other questions?
We have time for like one more if people have them.
Nope. That's it. Thank you.